Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue our lesson today talking about ecology. And today specifically we're talking about something known as terrestrial biomes. Now, what are terrestrial biomes? Well, remember that biomes is a word used to describe an area with similar vegetation, animal life, climate, and usually has the same geographic location, okay? And the word terrestrial here is talking about Earth or land. And so we're not talking about biomes that are in the water. We're talking about all the biomes that are on Earth's crust and part of the land, right? So let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're talking about today. So again, just a reminder, what is a biome? Biome, this is a term used to describe a certain area. Biomes are determined by the primary vegetation, the climate, the geographic location, and the animal life. So a biome will have all of these things in common, okay? And we'll go ahead and hop into it. One thing I really want us to look at and kind of start to wrap our head around is this graph. This is a graph that charts all of the different terrestrial biomes, okay? There's a couple things that we really want to know about this. Look at the y-axis, so the part that's going up and down over there on the left. Note that that says annual precipitation. So one of the big factors that determines what a biome is like is how much precipitation it gets. This is often in the form of rain, but it also includes things like snow and hail and sleet and all those other types of precipitation. Okay, look at the x-axis on the bottom. That's average annual temperature, and this is in degrees Celsius. So this is talking about how hot or cold it is, right? So I want us to just real quickly to orient ourselves, look in the bottom left corner. You can see that that little blue part there says tundra. Okay, because it's on the bottom, that means that it does not get much precipitation. And because it's really far to the left, that means it doesn't get much rain either. So the tundra is very, very cold and very, very dry. Let's look at the opposite side of that, the top right corner, that green area. You can see that that says tropical rainforest. Because it's really far to the right, that means it's really warm. And because it's really high up in the graph, that means it gets a lot of precipitation. So a tropical rainforest is very, very warm and very, very wet. Okay, we're going to talk about most of these different biomes today, and we're going to learn the type of vegetation and animal life that are in there. And something else that I want us to take particular note of is how these plants and animals have to adapt to survive in those locations. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the ball rolling and take a look at the first one here. First of all, I wanted to talk about the tundra. Okay, where can you find the tundra? Well, these are near the poles, so think the Arctic and the Antarctic, okay? But you can also find them really anywhere on the Earth that is high enough elevation, and we would call that alpine. So once you get really, really high up on a mountain, it starts to get really, really cold and starts to almost take on the characteristics of the tundra biome. Okay, what vegetations are in the tundra? Well, you're going to have plants like shrubs, grasses, and mosses, but one thing that's very important in the tundra is that there are no trees, and we'll talk about why that is here in just a second. Okay, the animals that you would find in the tundra are things like caribou, yak, musk ox, penguins, polar bears, a very interesting animal called a saiga, reindeer, walrus, and pika, which is a little rodent-like creature. Okay. A lot of these animals have characteristics that make them really good at living in this climate. So let's talk about the polar bear and the walrus. You might have heard of a term before called blubber. So blubber is like a layer of fat that mammals get sometimes. And fat, or those lipids, are good insulation, so they keep you warm. So where it's really, really cold, animals like the polar bear and the walrus, they're going to build up this blubber layer that helps keep them warm in these very, very cold environments. Okay? The precipitation in the tundra is very, very little. In fact, it's one of the biomes that gets the least amount of precipitation. Some people even call this a desert, which is true in the sense that tundras and deserts, they both get very, very little rain, or precipitation, but one big difference in between them is the temperature. The desert is very warm. The tundra, on the other hand, is freezing. It's very, very cold here. This is the coldest biome, okay? Now, I want to talk about some special features in the tundra, and this is a word I really need you to remember. Permafrost, okay? So what is permafrost? Well, you'll see that it kind of sounds like the word permanent, and it kind of sounds like the word frost, and that's basically what's going on here. Permafrost is a permanent layer of frozen soil, and this prevents large vegetation like trees from being able to grow. Any type of vegetation that needs to spread its roots down deep into the soil and spread out, they don't do very well in this biome because that permafrost prevents them from growing their roots down. So that's why tundras often don't have very many trees. They don't get much precipitation for one thing, but also the roots can't grow because of that permafrost. Okay, so I wanted to show you some pictures of some different animals that you can find in the tundra. Okay, so let's take a look at this picture on the far right, and there's another one right to the left of it there. So that kind of reindeer, antelope looking thing, that is called the saiga. And one thing I wanted to point out is look how odd this animal looks. Its nose almost takes on an elephant's trunk look to it, right? Well, what's going on here, you have to remember the tundra is very, very cold. That air is freezing. And so if you were just to take in a deep breath, it would probably really hurt. I mean, that cold air is going straight into your lungs. And so what's going on here is that long muzzle or that long trunk-like nose of the saiga helps to warm the air up before it gets into the lungs. Okay, some other things I wanted to point out, you can see in that top picture above the saiga, you can see there's snow there, right? The tundra is very, very cold. Look at the top left picture. That's not often what we envision the tundra being. In the top left picture there, I see grasses and green plants, right? So the tundra is very, very cold, but there is vegetation there. It's not totally devoid of life. It's just really cold and you're not getting much trees. But these plants that don't have very deep root systems, they usually do pretty well in the tundra. Okay, looking at the bottom left picture, that's the pika, which I just found kind of interesting. It's a small rodent-like creature, and that might remind you of something else that you've heard of before. Okay, so let's go into the next biome here. Okay, so I want to talk about the boreal forest. Okay, and another name for this that you might hear sometimes is called the taiga. Okay, kind of like tiger, but taiga. Okay, so the boreal forest, okay, where can you find these? Well, the location for the boreal forest is Canada, Alaska, northern United States, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Siberia, and Norway. So this is an area that's just south of the North Pole. It's still very, very cold, but it's not as cold as the tundra was. The vegetation that you'll find here tends to be evergreen trees like pines and spruces, but there are some deciduous trees like the birch, okay, but it's mostly evergreen trees here. What type of animals will you find in the boreal forest? Well, you can find moose, elk, deer, bears, boars, beavers, chipmunks, wolves, and otters, okay? So these are animals that tend to have a lot of fur. These will often also have that blubber that helps keep them warm. And some of these animals tend to hibernate. So bears, for example, is a great example of this. When there's a lot of food, when the environment is good and warm, bears eat a lot of food, right? They're omnivorous, so they eat some fish, they eat some berries. They're eating a lot when the getting's good, right, during the summer months. When the winter rolls around and it's really cold and food is harder to find, the bears will hibernate. And what that means is they kind of just go more dormant. They spend less time awake. They're spending more time sleeping throughout the day. And that helps them to conserve their energy when the food is very scarce and hard to find. So during the winter months, they really like to hibernate. They don't do as much. They don't get out during the day as much. They're just living off that blubber, right? These bears will store up food in the form of blubber. That helps keep them warm, but that also gives them something to burn throughout the winter months when food is very hard to find, okay? The precipitation here in the boreal forest is moderate, so we're getting a little bit more rain than we did in the tundra, okay? The temperature here is cold, but not as cold as the tundra, so this is kind of like the little brother of the tundra is one way you can think of it. It's cold, it's not raining a whole lot, but it's not as bad as it was in the tundra. Okay, let's look at the special features of the boreal forest. So a lot of the trees here in the boreal forest are cone-shaped. Think of like a Christmas tree, right? Where it comes up to a point at the top, right? Well, this cone-shaped feature of the trees, That's for a particular reason. It helps to prevent snow accumulation. So it's snowing a lot more here than it is in the tundra because the precipitation's higher. So it's snowing a lot because of how cold it is. These tree branches, if they just had snow accumulating and accumulating on them, the branches might snap and fall off. So instead, the trees are kind of cone-shaped, so when the snow falls on them, they just start to kind of roll off. And so now the trees aren't being weighed down by all of this snow. So again, that's an adaptation that these organisms have taken on to be able to live in these environments a little bit better. All right, I wanted to show you some pictures of these different, of the boreal forest. What are we looking at here? Okay, so here are some of the different animals in the boreal forest. You have bears and wolves and beavers. These are animals that have a lot of fur that helps keep them warm. Some of them have blubber, which is going to also keep them warm, that layer of fat. And some of them might even hibernate during the cold months. And that's when the temperature is the worst. That's when it's the coldest. So they're trying to conserve energy. Okay? In that bottom left picture, you can kind of see what I was talking about with those trees being cone-shaped. You can see there's not a whole lot of snow on those trees. There's snow all over the ground, but the snow doesn't really accumulate on the cone-shaped trees very much. They just roll off of it. And then the top left picture, that would be more of what the boreal forest would look like during the more temperate seasons. So maybe that's summer or spring. It's not covered in snow, but it's still really, really cold up there, right? Okay, great. Let's go to the next biome. What are we looking at now? So we are looking at the temperate grassland. Kind of think Central America for this. Okay, so the temperate grasslands, where can you find these? These are in the prairies in North America, the pampas in South America, the veldt in South Africa, and the steppe in Asia. These are all just kind of big open grasslands, okay? Well, what type of vegetation do we often find in grasslands? Well, the name is a big hint, right? The major vegetation in these biomes are grasses, okay? Because the grasses is the main type of vegetation, the animals that we often find here are animals that eat a lot of grasses, and we would call those grazing animals. So the animals that are common here are things like bison, antelope, donkeys, cows, anything like that that just eats a lot of grass all day. You'll probably find them in the grasslands because they love to eat that grass, okay? The next, talking about the precipitation here, because this is a temperate grassland, that means that we have seasons, right? In America, we have summer and spring and fall and winter, right? So depending on what the season is, you can get not very much precipitation. We would say that that's semi-arid, but it can also be semi-humid, just depending on what the climate is doing at that time. As the seasons change, you'll get more and less precipitation, right? The temperature here is temperate, and what we mean by that is it's not really hot or it's not really cold. It's just kind of in the middle. It's a moderate temperature here, okay? Let's look at some of the special features of the temperate grasslands, and then I'll go on and show you the pictures here. Okay, so for the temperate grasslands, you can actually subdivide this into two different biomes or ecosystems. You can have tall grasslands where the precipitation is higher, and you can have short grasslands based on if the precipitation's not as much, if it's not raining as much, the grasses won't grow as tall, and so we call those short grasslands. Now, tall grasslands are ideally suited for agriculture, and that's definitely the case here in America. That prairie right there, Central America, we call that the breadbasket of America. It gets a lot of precipitation, and that makes it really good at growing things agriculturally. So we grow a lot of wheat there, and that's where a lot of our breads and carbs and different things like that come from. So grasslands are really, really good for agriculture. They're flat, and they're good at growing a lot of plants very quickly. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of these different animals and vegetation in the grasslands. Okay, so again, you can see looking around in these pictures, it's mostly grasses, right? You see a shrub and a tree here and there, but the major vegetation here is grass, and that's why they're called grasslands. You can see the different animals. These are all grazing animals. Grazing animals, they are usually herbivorous, so they eat mostly plants. They're going to have a lot of molars that are good at grinding down that plant material, and they're often hooved animals. These are large areas of grass, and so they like to roam and move around a lot. So in the top left picture, we see some cows eating that grass. In the bottom left picture, we see bison. You can see that that's the tall grassland, right? That grass has grown a little taller. That's where the bison live, right there, Central America. And then you can just kind of see what's going on here. It's a lot of grasses and a lot of animals that eat those grasses, right? Great. Okay, I have one more biome for today, and then we'll wrap up and do some other work here in just a little bit. So the next biome I want to talk about is temperate deciduous forest. And what I want to tell you is that in America, or in Mississippi particularly, this is the type of biome that we live in. So this should sound pretty familiar to you, and when I go to the pictures, you'll see that it looks pretty similar or familiar as well. So temperate deciduous forest, let me tell you what that word deciduous means. So if a plant or a tree is deciduous, that means that it loses its leaves and that they grow back, and it does that every year. Okay, so a deciduous tree is kind of the opposite of an evergreen. It's not green all the time, it loses its leaves, and then they come back, and it just kind of follows what the seasons are doing. So the location for these temperate deciduous forests, they're very common in the northern hemisphere, such as North America, East Asia, and in Europe. The vegetation here are deciduous trees. Again, deciduous trees are trees that lose their leaves. Some examples of those are oak, maple, basswood, beech, and elm. The animals here are squirrels, rabbits, skunks, birds, mountain lions, bobcats, foxes, animals that are common to Mississippi for the most part. Okay, the precipitation here is that it's moderate precipitation throughout the year, right? And it's also going to kind of follow those seasons. What really changes with the seasons is the temperature. We know that when summer rolls around, it gets really, really hot, and when winter rolls around, it gets really, really cold. So it kind of fluctuates with the year, okay? The special feature here is that because it is a temperate deciduous forest and is following the seasons, there's a lot of seasonal variation. Okay, as seasons change, the vegetation lose their leaves to conserve energy, animals might hibernate, there's a growing season in the spring and the summer. So depending on when you come to a temperate deciduous forest, if you come in the winter versus the summer, they're going to look totally different, right? And that's a big feature of these deciduous forests. So let's look at a couple of pictures from this area, okay? Again, this should, for the most part, look pretty familiar to Mississippi, right? We got trees and grasses. You can see in some of the pictures there are trees with no leaves. In some pictures there's trees with a lot of leaves, and in some pictures the trees are losing their leaves. Again, that's just kind of following what the seasons are doing, and that's one of the major characteristics of the deciduous biome, okay? So thank y'all so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.